So today is International Safe Abortion Day. This brings to the fore that conversation again that we keep having in this country about abortion and safe or unsafe. There are people who even think that abortion should not even be a conversation at all in the first place. And then there are those that say, all right, so when abortion is a conversation, it's only a conversation with a professional, a medical professional. And this medical professional, then, it means that it's a safe abortion. If we just go strictly by the law and the Constitution, in what instances is abortion allowed in this country? Is in the event where a medical professional has determined that it's important to procure an abortion. Then that means that if it's a professional, it's going to be a safe abortion. However, the reality of our days is that we have very many unsafe abortions taking place in this country. Very many unsafe abortions being procured by medical practitioners, but not in the facility that they should be practicing. Unsafe abortions being procured by quacks who are calling themselves medical practitioners, and unsafe abortions are just being practiced by people who are at a point where they're desperate. We've heard of all this. We've seen gory images and we've seen reports of people using coat hangers and other crude things to conduct an abortion. So we have very many cases of unsafe abortions in this country. And it's not just in this country. And that's why there's an International Day for Safe Abortions. It's in recognition of the fact that there are many unsafe abortions in the world.
The discussions around abortion are emotive. I mean, the world over, even now when you think that it's something that has a consensus has been arrived at, it never really is arrived at. The goalpost keeps shifting. But then one can understand the emotions behind it. Because at the heart of an abortion, there's life. So essentially, the discussion around abortion is the discussion about life. And whether it is important to terminate life, then the discussion is at what point is life life? At what point then can you make such a decision on behalf of a fetus? Who has the right to make the decision for the fetus? I mean, this debate is a huge debate, and it's a constantly ongoing debate. And then there's, of course, the legal side to it. Then now, the really emotive one, then there's a religious side of it, what we call the moral side of it.
So with all of these things taking place, and we're looking at a mix and mash of these different conversations happening, the nexus is that as this conversation is being had on the religious side, on the moral side, pro-life, pro-choice, that abortions are still taking place.
That is a constant.
That is it. So that's the similar area where you have these 4 or 5 circles meeting. That similar area is that abortions are happening. So I believe now where the conversation for this day is that now in the space where they are happening, let us do all that we can ensure. Let's do all that we can to ensure that they're happening in a safe environment.
And then there's this aspect of the law. Because there are countries where abortion is outlawed, unless it is deemed that, one, by the health practitioner, the life of the mother is in danger, and so to save the life of the mother. Now, I'd like to understand how our laws cope with this. Because the discussion around abortion in this country is just as emotive as it is in other countries.
It's a tough one, it's an emotive one, and it brings in the whole issue of sexual and reproductive health rights.
Yes.
Right? So let's bring in somebody who's an expert on these matters, a human rights lawyer and a program officer on sexual and reproductive health rights at Kalin. Linda Wanjiru Kroeger joins us on the line. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on the show. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you.
Today, Linda, is International Safe Abortion Day. City, you want to ask a question?
Ask Linda how she's doing. Linda, how have you been?
Hi, Dr. Maga. I'm doing well. How
Super.
are you?
Excellent. Now you can answer Eric's question.
Mumamaliza.
Maliza.
Okay. Linda, International Safe Abortion Day being commemorated today globally. Is there a theme to this day, and what's the focus?
This year's theme has a number of aspects, but really we're focusing on making unsafe abortions history worldwide.
Okay. When you talk about making abortions history, that is unsafe abortions, I presume, history worldwide. Let's bring it to Kenya. Do we have statistics of the number of abortions, unsafe abortions that are conducted in Kenya? Of course, it's going to be very difficult because they're unsafe, they're backstreet abortions, but do you have some working figures of the numbers that we're dealing with?
Yes, we do. Actually, we do have numbers in terms of the unsafe abortions conducted within the country, as at an official report by APHRC, an NGO working on research, and the Ministry of Health. Yearly or annually, we have about 500,000 unsafe abortions happening within Kenya, and this is contrasted with about 19 million unsafe abortions for sub-Saharan Africa, which is the highest in the world that we have at the moment. So in terms of working statistics, we do have an idea. However, within the last couple of years, we haven't seen an intentionality, most especially from state actors in terms of documenting these indicators, which really does put us within a precarious position and only working on practice-related data, but not really having a bigger picture.
How is this information collected?
So as we know, the custodians of data on SRHR indicators are state actors. If you want any data beyond SRHR, the people who have the most accurate data are our state actors, and that's no different when it comes to incidences of abortion, whether safe or unsafe. So if this data is not published within the larger systems that we have, either at county level and national level with MOH, then you don't necessarily have a bigger picture. And the siloed approach that I'm talking about is that if you have an NGO like Kellen that's working in a particular area, we might have maybe a 75% chance of capturing accurate data on what incidences of safe and unsafe abortion look like within that location. But really, it does speak to one of the things or one of the key aspects that we are lacking in our advocacy and being able to advance reproductive health care within the country, the lack of up-to-date, real-time data on incidences of safe and unsafe abortions within the country.
Linda, in this abortion conversation, and we're looking at this day to make it, to continue advocating or agitating to make it safe in this country and around the world, really. The legality of it comes into play. And we know what the law says in this country, whereby the health of the mother or that of the child or in the presence of a trained medical professional is when abortion then is considered legal, right? We have quite a number of abortions procured in this country outside of these requirements set by the law. And still then a lot of those being deemed as unsafe. So even when we are having this conversation, what is necessary to consider would be those abortions that are happening outside of what the law permits and those which are unsafe. So then how do we tie all of this together, where there are abortions happening outside the law, where there are those that are happening within the requirements set by the same law, and then now saying, in all of these, they should be safe. How do we do that?
That's a really great question and falls towards the cracks of not just the work that I do at Kellyn and the SRHR sector in general, but also as a feminist and human rights practitioner. And really, when we dissect the conflict that we have in terms of safe and unsafe abortion within the Kenyan context, we need to look at the law. The first thing is obviously, as you've highlighted, the Constitution does allow for access to safe and legal abortion within 4 instances, within the opinion of a trained health professional, in instances where the life or the health of the woman is in danger, in emergency instances, which would be post-abortal care and the like, and also if you have any other written law that does provide for certain aspects when it comes to access to abortion. However, within the legal framework in Kenya, we also have a criminal aspect within the penal code that still exists and criminalizes both this health professional and the women and the young women and persons who would like to access a safe and legal abortion. So this criminalization breeds a lot of fear, and most especially if we are looking at a demographic that consists of indigent persons who are not aware of the law, persons who cannot access private medical care. This conflict of laws is not clear to them, and they definitely do not know how to navigate it. So you'll find that with the communities that we work with, when there is the fear of harassment by police or being arrested, or your neighbor walking to the police post and saying that you either plan or are accessing an abortion, then you'll find that these quacks then become opportunists and then become an option when they necessarily should not be, because the Constitution remains supreme. We have so many aspects in terms of policy documents that do provide a framework to access safe abortion. But because of these key aspects within the law, and especially criminalization, then you'll have fear, you'll have stigma, and you will have quacks thriving, as we have seen in the past time and time again. So really this dichotomy of issues and that conflict of laws does contribute significantly to us consistently talking about unsafe abortion.
Right.
And if we can't deal with that, then we won't be able to make the necessary dent in reducing these unsafe incidences.
Do I hear you saying, essentially, it may be hidden, but that one of the ways to be able to get this safe abortion that is being advocated for is to open up the law and make it legal, and that way then you're able to regulate and make sure that it is safe in all circumstances? Is that what you're saying?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, and this is something that I think a lot of even medical practitioners would be able to jump in and agree with. We actually have sufficient legal structures or legal and normative frameworks to govern and regulate abortion. However, this one aspect around criminalization remains a problem. So even if we have conversations, and this is a bit technical on the legal aspect, so even if we have conversations around legality, we can't necessarily make those positive gains if we haven't dealt with the criminalization aspect. Because you have this hierarchy where the Constitution is supreme and says that abortion can be regulated in the opinion of a trained health professional, but we haven't aligned our penal code and our criminal code to be able to be anchored by this constitutional provision. So while Linda and the SRHR sector is busy advocating for 26(4) within the Constitution, we still have on the ground and in practice police officers arresting women and healthcare providers on abortion and related charges, whilst within the purview of the law, really, we should have deleted those particular sections within the penal code. So for me, when we remove the criminalization aspect and are able to implement the constitutional dispensation, the Health Act in itself, and the very robust Ministry of Health policies that we have on comprehensive abortion care, post-abortion care, we actually have a substantive foundation of law that does regulate abortion. But the criminal aspect that still continues to prevail since before independence, during colonial times, remains to be the problem that impacts largely our indigent populations, that's the ordinary Mwananchi.
You know, you venture into that and you then get into the moral side of the conversation, which is maybe where we'll be heading after we take this short break. We'll even allow some people to call in and if they have conversations around this and thoughts about this. Today is International Safe Abortion Day. We're having a conversation with Linda Wanjiru Kroeger. She's a human rights lawyer. She's also a program officer on sexual and reproductive health rights with Kalin. It's an NGO. So what is it that needs to happen to make sure that we reduce the number of unsafe abortions in the country? Is it totally discouraging against abortion, or is it opening up safe abortion so that it's more easily accessible? This is a top one. It's a really hot conversation. In the Situation Room this and every weekday morning is Eric Latif, Nduoko CT Muga. Today is International Safe Abortion Day, and we're having a conversation around this and the sexual and reproductive health rights by a program officer from Kailin, Linda Wanjiru. She's also a human rights lawyer. Linda, before we took the break, we were talking about, so how do we make abortion more accessible and safe? And we said this basically takes us to the conversation that this country has been having. In 2010, around the Constitution, there are those who actually campaigned against the Constitution of Kenya 2010 on grounds that it was leaving a window open for abortion. Some of the comments that are coming in on social media today are, abortion is a sin. So why are we having a conversation whether safe or unsafe abortion day? As far as they're concerned, abortion is already a sin. Now, how do we navigate through these waters? We've had attempts in this country to have sexual and reproductive health rights bills brought before Parliament and passed, and they have faced stiff challenges.
Serious headwinds.
Linda, how do we navigate through this?
I think it's usually very interesting that when we talk about abortion, we take the conversation towards morality and immorality, while in essence, abortion cannot exist without being undertaken or without the purview of medical practice. And really these conversations that move abortion from the sphere of this trained health professional, this medical environment that makes it safe, take us within the conversations of unsafe abortion. Because, and really this becomes a philosophical conversation, what's moral and what's immoral in any society differs across the world. Even within the Kenyan context, if we expand the discussion beyond abortion and move into morality and immorality, we will never reach consensus. But an abortion does need to be undertaken within a particular environment to make it safe. And this is not less than a medical facility with certain cadres of medical professionals. The Health Act talks about 3 particular medical practitioners, an MD, a medical doctor, a clinical officer, and a registered nurse stroke midwife. These are personnel who've gone to school for 5 years and plus. But when we take the conversation to the church, to SUPKEM, and all manner of religious institutions, and then make it a conversation about morality, that we're really not being fair in looking at the lives of women, the lives of adolescents. And it takes me back to a particular case that has been within the conversations on media, social, traditional, within various practitioners in the field of JMM that sought to highlight the plight of a very young girl, 14 years, just finished class 8, was very excited to be joining a secondary school, as we all know, and she was sexually violated. But because of the stigma that surrounds not just abortion, but issues such as sexual offenses and sexual and reproductive health rights broadly, she was afraid to report the incident. And again, when you have fear, when you have stigma, you are afraid of being discriminated upon by either society or your community. So JMM, with her peer, her fellow adolescent, accessed an unsafe abortion from a quack. And as we all know, this translated into a very hellish experience for her and her mom. This is a family that's in Kisii. They went through 3 medical institutions. One, a county referral hospital, the other, a faith-based mission hospital, until they ended up at Kenyatta National Hospital, all the while trying to handle this situation that had resulted from an unsafe abortion, to offer post-abortion care. And to show you the severity of what that looks like, this young adolescent at 14, 15 had to deal with kidney failure. And that's why she couldn't get treated at any of these facilities. And by the time this particular case was going to court, and we were trying to look for who to hold accountable from state entities and the like, this young adolescent passed away. And that's just one story. One particular story. You can imagine of the 500,000 unsafe abortions that we're talking about, how many look like JMM's story. And within that particular case, you can hear about the health and practical nuances, because at that point, it's not about morality, it's about this is her health, this is her life, we would like to save her.
Sure.
So whenever we move abortion towards concepts around moral and immoral conversations, we're not being fair in preserving life and health.
Sure.
We're really promoting unsafe abortions in undertaking that particular discourse.
I hear what you're saying, but then I'm also thinking about what the argument or the contribution to the conversation from the other side would be. And if we look at it like this, when we talk about morality, the thinking behind a number of people is that the process that led to having this abortion had to do with sex. Whether it is abuse, whether it is consensual, whatever it is, had to do with sex, which is continually an issue that is hinged greatly on morality. And the assumption is that you engaged in sexual practice outside of an acceptable relationship, right? In most cases, marriage. People are not thinking about the circumstances that got to that point. Why it cannot be ignored or pushed to the side is that the people who have this mindset are in this set of people that we are asking to consider how to make abortion safe. See what I'm saying? They are involved in the religious sector. They're involved in the state actors where they have people with what we would call traditional thinking. They're involved in social circles. And they are the people that we're asking to be part of this conversation to make abortion safe. So it is absolutely necessary that it is not necessary to include their thinking, include them in part of the conversation. I think the question then would be how? Because that's the thinking. And they're part of this group that you're saying, let's make it safe. It involves everybody. And their thinking then also must be involved.
That's very true, Ndu. We can't achieve safe abortion without the input of everyone. But also, I think it's important to be able to understand what regulation would look like within that purview. So you're very first and foremost right in pointing out that this entrenched concepts around morality and immorality are founded on norms, normative thinking within our society, whether you're looking at it culturally, in practice, and also within a religious sphere. And whilst it would be pertinent to indulge in the morality and immorality of it, our statistics are telling us different. That even as we campaign for abstinence, whether within the family unit or broadly, if you're in a public sphere, our young persons are engaging in sex.
Sure. If
we look at current statistics, the sexual debut age has really lowered, where we are having it at 12. At the last NGEC report that I read through. So if we are having our young ones at 12, and we remember also that adolescent within the World Health Organization definition fall within 10 to 19, then it means we are not giving age-appropriate bolstering in terms of information and comprehensive sexuality education, so that our adolescents are able to understand, one, that the repercussions of sex and what they're engaging in and what that could result in. So really the gap is intersectional. Even before we get to the conversation along abortion, we do have to look at the concepts around sex within our society and the adolescents who are now forming a higher percentage in sexual debut. I know also in incidences of new infections for HIV, adolescents again are at the top of it. And that really does tell us that we have to have a very inclusive and very intersectional approach whenever we are looking at sexual and reproductive health rights broadly and together. So the conversation just does have to be joined, but also we need to be able to consider or prioritize that abortion has to remain within the purview of a medical discussion. That even when we are considering it, we are not saying that abortion should be on demand. We're saying that we have a constitution that does allow a health professional to be able to assess and provide an opinion whether the life health of the woman is in danger and give guidance to that effect. We are saying that we have policies developed by the Ministry of Health themselves. We're saying, could they be implemented? Can we demystify some of this language that's very personal to our values and beliefs, and really have a discussion along the constitutional provision and the Health Act provisions when it comes to access to safe and legal abortion? Can we prioritize the life of a woman or an adolescent like JMM, as I shared, when it comes to be able to access a safe and legal abortion, and devoid of the tensions that we have against the right to life, the right to reproductive health care, abortion is a sin, abortion is murder? Really move from that purview and try and reconcile our personal values and beliefs with the right to health and reproductive health care within the particular circumstances or instances that are highlighted in law, and also within the professional ethics and codes of conduct when it comes to medical professionals.
But Linda, let me ask the question, is it really possible to have a meaningful conversation about safe abortion if we are not having a conversation about safe sex? Remember, it's sexual and reproductive. The focus is on the reproductive when we're talking about abortions. But there is the understanding that this entire discussion of abortion would not be a discussion at all if sex was not at the heart of it. Now, in the time you've worked in sexual and reproductive health space, how easy, how difficult have you found this discussion about safe sex? And I'm not just talking about adolescents, I'm not talking about young people, I'm talking about adults. People who are of consenting age and who then can make decisions for themselves within the legal statutes we have in this country. How easy is it to have the discussion?
I think we've made strides when it comes to conversations, having conversations about safe sex. But in terms of practice, we are seeing an issue that is becoming very apparent and is very interlinked to conversations, like I said, around comprehensive sexuality education and even more so contraceptive use and uptake. And the thing is, we're on the same page in terms of the intersectionality of the approach whenever we are looking at sexual and reproductive health and rights. You can't talk about abortion if you're not talking about sex. Now, if we're interlinking it to the discussion on abortion, in instances where a person has become pregnant because they had consensual sex, that's a different situation, but it doesn't mean that that's the only instance that would lead someone to an abortion. But let me take a step back. Our approach towards advocacy, not just on safe abortion, but sexual and reproductive health care, has to involve conversations on safe sex and comprehensive sexuality education. And this boils down not just on a health kind of conversation, but also access to information and the right to education within the Kenyan context. Now, we've seen a prevailing resistance in being able to educate the masses on concepts of contraceptives. And the same resistance that we are facing in terms of abortion conversations is the same that we are seeing when it comes to the use of contraception, where misinformation and disinformation become prevailing, that even as a woman, as you're considering being able to access family planning, access contraceptives, there's still a bit of myths and misconceptions around the use of these things that we need to demystify. You'll hear someone saying that if you use, for example, an implant you have cancer. Unproven, not even within the medical confines of medical knowledge. So there's still a lot of conversation in terms of demystifying some of the misinformation and disinformation that we are having in terms of contraceptive use, even as we lead up to the discussion on abortions. And that has to start if we're looking at the demographic of adolescents and young persons, school-going children. We have policies that talk about age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education. They're not really implemented. And that's why, for example, in the case of JMM, an adolescent would feel comfortable going for advice from a fellow adolescent as opposed to actually reporting a sexual violation to their parent or to their guardian or the referral pathways that we have. So that tells us there's a bigger problem that we have to look at when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights and care.
Exactly.
Now, linking it to the conversation on abortion, you're not only going to access an abortion in instances where you've conceived because of consensual sex. Remember, when we talk about in the opinion of a trained health professional, I might have an ectopic pregnancy, right? Where the embryo is growing outside of my womb. That calls for a conversation that's really medically tied. I might have been raped. There was no consent in that sexual encounter. And that's the intricacy, really, that I think makes abortion need to be held within a conversation of health practice as opposed towards society, but not negating the fact that we do need to have open conversations around sexuality, sexuality, reproductive health, safe sex, and the whole inclusive intersectional approach when it comes to be able to promote and advance sexual and reproductive health.
And Linda, I listen to you and I agree with many of the things that you're saying. And also the fact that I'm an adult human being who lives in this country, I understand where all these challenges are coming from. The challenges are basically cultural, religious, from cultural norms and practices, and then what we've been brought up with in terms of religion and how we deal with it. Now, this is where I want to call out the civil society organizations such as yours and others. Yes, they've been doing a lot of work and advocacy and trying to push the needle on the sexual and reproductive health rights. But at the same time, whenever the conversation comes to the bigger challenge and where the pushback is coming from, and this is a critical stakeholder in the society, these are the community thought leaders who are the custodians of our culture, and the community thought leaders who are religious leaders in our organization, in our community. Civil society organizations sort of repulses the thought of engaging with them, and pushes that responsibility to the government and tells the government, you must make sure that these laws are implemented. You must make sure that this, forgetting that the government is also operating in the same environment where they know that they are dealing with these community leaders who have serious pushback. Government is led by politicians. Politicians want votes. Politicians do not want to topple this apple cart. I'm looking at today's newspapers. There's a quarter-page advert that's been placed here by some 22 civil society organizations, open letter to the Ministry of Education and Health in Kenya to recommit to the Eastern and Southern Africa commitment on provision of comprehensive sexuality education. Basically what you're talking about. And they say, we, representatives of civil society organizations in Kenya, and 1,700 diverse young people drawn from the human rights sector working towards advancement and realization of sexual reproductive health and rights of adolescents and young people, are calling upon the Ministry of Education and Health to recommit to the Eastern and Southern Africa commitment on comprehensive sexuality education and sexual reproductive health that will further advance access to information on reproductive health for young people. And number two, you're calling on these two ministries to include and ensure full implementation of comprehensive sexuality education in the competency-based curriculum. And they say by 2020, Kenya was expected to develop a comprehensive sexuality education curriculum, reduce unplanned pregnancies by 75%, eliminate sexual and gender-based violence, reduce the number of new HIV infections, decrease by 50% the number of young people who don't have access to youth-friendly information and health services. Yes. Government of Kenya committed itself at an international forum and said, this is what we're going to do. Government of Kenya comes back home and finds Kenyans. And Kenyans give the pushback. Now, you said there's a lot of work in advocacy that's needed, and that's why I want to just push again the whole weight on all these 22 civil society organizations that have taken out this quarter-page advert and telling them, I think you ought not to avoid these community leaders, the religious leaders and the cultural leaders, because these are the custodians of our morality. If we say we cannot go into morality conversation, you're missing the point. We will still be here 30 years from today, Linda. You must address this.
Thanks, Eric. Very many thoughts going through as you spoke, but I really want to anchor it on the spirit of the question that you've asked in terms of morality and immorality. So we do not engage or refrain from engaging with our community leaders and our gatekeepers, as you've called them. We do have actually members of different mainstream churches and different evangelicals who are actually pro-choice, who actually campaign for access to safe and legal abortion. But because they are not, let's say, at the helm of leadership within the different institutions, you wouldn't necessarily see you wouldn't feel their presence or see their voices at the same level, for example, as you'll see maybe the bishop or of the Catholic Church or the cardinal himself whenever a statement is put out. So we do not refrain. We do work together because, as I highlighted earlier, an intersectional approach is necessary because if we're talking about abortion, we're not talking about it as a separate right or a separate health choice, but it does exist within a comprehensive network of other socioeconomic aspects. And I want to tie it down to also aspects tied to indigent persons, like I talked about. The very key places where you see this intersectional approach necessary and at work is when we are at the community level. I highlighted the criminalization that we see on the ground when it comes to the penal code, and the fact that we actually have women who are in prison as we speak because of either accessing an unsafe abortion or having a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, that was then perceived as an abortion and imprisoned for that. And the reason why I say, yes, morality exists and it's a concept that we cannot live devoid of. But if we go to the nitty-gritty of these cases, at the point that this woman, for example, is undergoing a spontaneous miscarriage, a spontaneous abortion, which we call a miscarriage, and the neighbor assumes that they are having an abortion and the police are called and they are arrested, harassed, criminalized, taken to court, at no single point do we see not even morality, but even these community structures actually trying to ascertain the truth of what is happening. It's not at that point, morality does not exist in the real life scenarios. But when we're having a conversation right now, as we will have on social media, as we will continue to engage, like last week when African Censored launched the Crooks and Wombs documentary, and we're engaging at that high-level discussion, we'll talk about all these philosophical aspects of morality, what is immoral, what's moral. But when we talk about the real-life situation on the ground, devoid of intersectional aspects such as privilege, then morality doesn't exist at that point. It's more of it's for you and your world and how you will navigate that particular aspect. And this forms the majority of the statistics that we are handling, Eric. And at that point, when a client is coming to you and you're looking at the trail of evidence and fully they had a miscarriage that is now being called an abortion, then how do you distinguish and make an argument around morality when this person is at risk of going to prison? So it's not to say that we don't work together. We do have religious leaders who are our champions. We do have conversations with our communities. but also to be able to contextualize this very broad conversation that we are having around theoretical frameworks on morality and immorality within the real life experiences of persons on the ground. And the more we continue to talk and not act, the more our statistics continue to prevail as dismal. And these statistics are actual persons, actual human beings that we are not holding safe or protecting and advancing their human rights, because SRHR are not rights that are given. They are part of our human rights framework. But this broader conversation really is what has taken us away from the purview of that human rights framework into more of a question of you've chosen to have an abortion, it is immoral, it is moral.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Linda. Linda Wanjiru is a human rights lawyer and a program officer for sexual and reproductive health rights at Kalin, one of the NGOs in the country that is really pushing on this particular matter. Today is International Safe Abortion Day, and that's why we're having that conversation with Linda.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.